subscribe to Saleswalah Studios and do not forget to click on the bell icon.
Even the word hijra is a Persian word. It is not if I would say, it's not an ethnic Indian term, but a term which was borrowed from Persia or from the Persian language, which some of the trans people who came in from Persia brought in. So while they came in from the ports of Surat, they brought Farsi in. So Farsi is how you call Persian in local dialect. So when they brought Farsi in, the entire term hijra comes from the Arabic root word hijra. And hijra means to make the journey.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Leisurely Batein. My guest today is Zainab Patel. Zainab is Director, Diversity and Inclusion at KPMG and also a TEDx speaker. Zainab, welcome to Leisurely Batein. How are you doing?
Thank you, Subhadip, for inviting me and doing well after having survived COVID. This is my first interaction publicly, so happy to be on it.
Well, you're looking recovered. I don't want to talk much about COVID and the audience.
Yeah.
So we'll jump straight into our conversation. Zainab, I wanted to start off understanding how and when did you first realize that your soul did not identify with your physicality, and was it confusing?
This is a question I get asked often, and I love answering this question. I think, if I go back and think of myself, I was born on a cold January morning about 40 years ago, so giving out my age as well. So, and I was born to a very middle class, very average, not extremist, not right, nor left. I think people were just a set of Catholic parents in Mumbai. And the way my family went, the emphasis was never on finding an heir for the family. So no emphasis on the typical ghar ke naam ka kya hoga types and what will happen to the family name, what will happen to the lineage. Because I have two elder sisters ahead of me. So one is 10 years and the other is 8 years. I think the only kind of joy that my parents got was that there was someone who was male assigned at birth born to them. And they were pretty happy with that. And not that I was ever born up in an environment where I was forced to be a girl. I had this, you can probably understand that 8 years after the second child of theirs, they finally found someone and they wouldn't want to tamper at least with what God gave them because they had to. I think as I grew up, 5 years, 6 years, when I started getting conscious of the environment around me, and Subhadip, this was in an environment where I was not even exposed to my sisters because my sisters were studying in a boarding school in Karwar, in Karnataka, and I was in Mumbai. I realized that I'm not actually the boy that my parents think I am, or I'm not the boy that my friends think I am, or my classmate. And I was always wondering why I'm not the girl that I always wanted to be. And for a young exploratory mind, these are questions that come up. Started experimenting, wearing some of my clothes at my sister because I was the only one left in the house. My dad would go to work, my mother would sleep in the aftertime. As I started growing up, the sense of gender dysphoria became stronger and stronger and stronger. I would call myself an averagely bright student, not in the first 3, but definitely in the first 10 in the class. There came a time in my life when I was in school and started experiencing severe bouts of dysphoria. So a lot of people tell you that dysphoria only happens in a particular age, at adolescent. So most of my dysphoria came in my pre-adolescent years, where I very strangely wanted to be a girl every day. I would tell myself, I would pray to God, I would do all sorts of mumbo jumbo just to kind of believe that if I wake up and God willing, I would actually be a girl. This happened, but it took me many, many, many years. I find when I got up, I realized, yes, I have become the woman I wanted to. So I started struggling to depression. I hated going to school. Couldn't even manage And I started getting stage fright then. As a very young, confident person, I started losing the ability to publicly speak. And Shubhadeep, we've interacted on many forums together. What you see in front of you is a final product. But there was a time in my life when I couldn't ask people addresses. I couldn't ask people questions. I remember I moved to Delhi in 2009, and at that time GPS and Google Maps were not so easily available. The areas were still being marked, and I kept moving around an area for 30 minutes just trying to find the location. And that was something similar that all through my formative years in school, I tried to grapple with the idea of finding my real self. And the real self was not based on the body that I had. It was something that was hidden in me.
Right.
And that took a very long time, because people think that transphobia is always external. It is what your family treats you with, your friends treat you with, society treats you. But a lot of the homophobia is also internalized, because we see outside, we see people being ostracized. And then came that point of time in my life where I started experimenting with body harm. I tried multiple attempts at suicide in school. So when I see the entire Sushant Singh episode happening, and I see what's happening with self-harm, whether it is self-harm or acted upon, I started experiencing that way back in school. And after one particular incident, when I was lying on a hospital bed, trying to make out what is going to be of my life, something inside me snapped and told me that, I've taken enough chances with life. You survived through all of that. Now the only positive thing is to move ahead. I dropped out of college multiple times because what I was not what my colleagues wanted me to be. And it was embarrassing. It was shameful both to me and my parents, because we came in from a very average middle class family, and to be able to pay college fees was a big deal. And I remember at that point of time I said that I'll live life at my own thing. And I took up a job in the early 2000s with the call center, which was an inbound call center at that point of time. So for me, working for 6 months at a 15,000 salary helped me enough to save up for my entire college fees. I dropped it. I couldn't take the stress of working the entire nights, but it saved me enough money. And I think that's when the tryst of me with my destiny started. That what is it that I wanted to be? Would I continue to be Ernest, the person that my parents had given birth to, whom the society affirmed, or do I be true to myself and make true Viktor Frankl's advice in his book Man Searching for Meaning,
right,
that the situations can be harsh, but to respond to it is totally within your control. It takes a lot of courage to get that control in your life. And that's why today I'm an outspoken person on many issues, because this outspokenness has been sharpened through years of neglect, through abuse, to sexual assault, to homelessness, to migration to another city. And ultimately finding myself today where I am is a product of all of that. And hence I'm a much more resilient person today.
Phenomenal. I think it's very powerful what you say, Zainab, and I think we all are very proud of what you've been able to do. Zainab, my next question is, and I ask this because a lot of people like me are, our understanding of the transgender community is through media and through popular media, which is very different. And what we understand, or what I understand, is there is a very strong Guru Shishya parampara in the transgender community. So I'd like to A, understand that, and B, also understand who have been some of your role models in the transgender community who gave you the encouragement, the power. Sometimes we all need a role model in our life to transform. So I'd like to get your views and understand that, please.
See, so only a specific community of transgender individuals, and I said that just like when you talk about women or men, they are not a homogeneous group. There are groups of men. There are men with personality, physical traits, opinionated people, all that make up the persona of a person. And just like that, you have an extremely heterogeneous group of trans people. One of it is what we look at an ethnic transgender group, which has mostly found roots in South Asia. So there when you talk about Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, you have a very strong ethnic group. In North India, they're called Kinnar, otherwise referred to as Hijra generally throughout India. You go to southern parts of India, they're called Tirunangai. So various denominations for a community which forms a hierarchical society. And the way hierarchy that was defined, even the word Hijra is a Persian word. It is not if I would say, it's not an ethnic Indian term, but a term which was borrowed from Persia or from the Persian language, which some of the trans people who came in from Persia brought in. So while they came in from the ports of Surat, they brought Farsi in. So Farsi is how you call Persian in local dialect. So when they brought Farsi in, the entire term Hijra comes from the Arabic root word Hijra. And Hijra means to make the journey from one point, and that's why the Islamic calendar is called Hijra, which marks the Prophet movement from Mecca to Medina. So incidentally today is the second day of the new Islamic year, but it's the Islamic year is called Hijra, which means basically movement. And for us, it was basically that. And one term, why Guru Chela? Very interesting. We call a Guru Goswami. Now, these are in Sanatan texts as well as the lived tradition and oral tradition that are in the transgender Hijra community. A Guru is called Goswami. One is because, it could mean that Go could also mean the earth, as in Go Bhumi, it's earth. Go could also mean cows. But in our sense, Go means the seven perceptory senses in the body. And a person who's able to control that is called a Goswami. Now, when you detach yourself physically, mentally, emotionally from your natal families, the cutting of the umbilical cord is symbolic of taking new birth, right? Because you're detaching yourself. You're becoming a being in yourself. So when we detach ourselves, which in older days used to be through ritual castration, the process is called nirvan. Now, what does nirvan mean in Sanskrit? It means enlightenment, getting higher purpose. And that meant severing all of the earthly ties that we have with our blood relatives to form a new congregation of sorts. And that is why it is important that you have a guru. In my life, I've been very lucky to have many people who have guided me. And I think my biggest guru was my mom. My mom, who passed away and 8 years ago, my biological mother, because she, I believe, taught me the most invaluable lessons in life. She was a homeschooled native Tulu speaker from Karnataka who had no idea about English, but she taught me the basic skills in life, to cook for myself, to fend for myself, and to stand up to every adversity. If I talk about from the Hijra community, two people have influenced me. One was someone who I look upon as a mother, Gauri Sawant. She is a famous trans activist who's featured in a Vicks ad which talked about the joy of caring and that motherhood has no gender. And the second most influential person in my life today, and who is the only influential person that I look at today for all decisions in my life and guidance, is someone called Acharya Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi. She is a Kinnar Akhada Acharya, and she's formed the Akhada which calls people to back to their Sanatan roots, because people felt that there was a need for people to go back to their ethnic roots. And so she has been, so I have seen her transform. I have known her when she used to wear short skirts and revealing tops, to using very colorful language, to the person that she is today. And for me to see that transformation in the person is to actually believe that anything in life is possible. If you choose to believe in that, you put your heart and mind to it, nothing in the world can stop you from achieving. So these two people taught me the most valuable thing in your life is that whenever you get up in the morning, you see your face. And when you see your face, you should be able to see a reflection of what the world didn't want you to become, and yet you've chosen against all odds to become that person. It might not be beautiful from the world standard, but is the most beautiful thing that could ever happen to you, because you saw this face in your dreams only. And then they said, khabo mein, mere khabo mein jo aaya, that popular Hindi song.
Right.
So I saw this self of me in my dreams many years ago. And this is my first love, if I must say so, after my mother.
Right, that's phenomenal. Very, very powerful indeed. Zainab, you've done exceptionally well, I must say, in your professional life. Now, how hard was it as a transgender woman to be accepted?
This is a very painful statement to make. I remember when I came back from Bangkok to India, and I had transitioned, and this was how I looked about 2 years ago also. I mean, maybe a slimmer version of what you can see in front of you. And I happened to go to a gay friend's house and at Gurgaon. And he invited me, and he said, we were friends for a little more than a decade. And he said, why don't you come over? You've come after so long to Gurgaon, to India. Come home and have lunch with us. And I went to his house, and his mother walked into the room, and she knew me from before. She looked, she smiled, she said a word, and just a pleasantry, and she walked back, and she called him to the kitchen and told him that either this person leaves or we all leave the house right now. And when he came back, he was like very apologetic, did not know what to tell me. And I said that your mother wants me to leave. And he said, let's go out and spend it. I said, I have no issues, because the cost and implication of my transitioning has been on me and me itself. I will never hold someone to ransom to accept me, except for the fact that I accepted myself, and that came at a big cost. Subhadip, leaving the family of your choice. I have never been an ambitious person. I have been very content with whatever God sent my way. I never, had this ambition about traveling outside Mumbai. In fact, I used to be, when I left Mumbai to come to Delhi, so a few of my friends actually put a bet on me saying that, this person will be back in 6 months, mind you, and they lost 30,000 on that bet. So I was like very happy being in those stalls of Parel in Mumbai, being very happy in a very average middle class, living in my old world, being pushed off that house, being deprived of the love of relatives, having your near and dear ones. I remember my mother was suffering from cancer when I went to Delhi, and she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And her treatment went on for 2.5 years. And every time I had to go to Mumbai, my family insisted I cut my hair and go, so that I appear as a boy to them. So if I wanted to see my mother, that was a sacrifice I made. And to make that choice, because I knew my mother would perhaps not be living with us in this world for a very long time, and that was the choice I made. Mentally, physically, sexually abused is part of what we go through every day. So in a sense, it's normalized for us, but definitely not normal in the sense it should be. Leaving one city to another, making the choice of being a migrant due to my identity and also due to the economics. I've still been lucky to find a partner for myself, Subhadip, but if I look at it, it took me many years of struggle to become who I am. And perhaps also the fact that today, if I look back and think of my partner and me who doesn't like public attention, who doesn't like to talk about our relationship, and perhaps lives a very hidden life. I won't say closeted life, but a hidden life. I appreciate his fact that he might not want to see with me in Facebook and stuff like that. So these are the many costs that I have borne. We talk about the glass ceiling for our women colleagues. Unfortunately, in my case, I didn't have a ceiling. I had to create it, break it, re-aspire, reimagine, and make a new one for myself. And that's how I absolutely landed in this job. And now today I can talk about this experience. I remember when I came back from Bangkok, I was being interviewed by a very big manufacturing company in India, an Indian company.
Right.
And at that point of time, they did like 10 rounds of interviews with me. And this was the last phase. They asked for my salary certificate, did 2 psychometric assessments with me. And it was just an informal meeting with the chairperson to understand and set expectation. And after that meeting, I was told that they didn't have a job profile for me. So I was being interviewed as a manager for D&I in that firm. And I said that you're just looking at experience and not lived experience or skills which I bring to. Fortunately, in just about 6 months of time, KPMG picked me up and perhaps did its fastest recruitment 7 days to get me and sign a job offer.
Wow.
And they made me a director in the firm. And I met the person after a very long time and I bumped into one of the meetings. And I said, thank God for not choosing me. I would have never been a director. So that's my stuff. That, one is the fact that having no access to washrooms, which may come across as a very trivial thing for a lot of people, that why do trans people make it so big about getting access to washrooms? The fact is that sanitation is not an entitlement, is a requirement, is an essential. And not having access to safe sanitation is a problem. And for me, I kind of developed a mindset that I did not have, and this was about 10-15 years ago. No one talked about trans rights or access to exclusive bathroom then. I actually stopped drinking water to the day, and my water intake would actually come in for my tea and coffee. So that limited the number of trips to the washroom. So when I look at all of these small examples and how tough life is for most of us. See, today, educated, living in a house of my own, having the chance to speak to you in English, getting interviewed by so many people. But if I see someone on the street, they are devoid of so many privileges, and I am not blind to my privilege. I still say I'm a very privileged person. But having gone through all of that, begging on the street, trying to be part of the community, which is part of our traditional employment. This is what we did traditionally. So going through all of that, living away from your family, not having someone to look at, suicidal tendency, all of this has been part of making Zainab.
Wow, indeed, very, very inspiring. It's sometimes. Really, as you said, the whole privilege part and everything. So, Zainab, I wanted to understand, as a corporate India, is corporate India comfortable to choose a pronoun to communicate with the transgender employee base?
So I think corporate India is slowly waking up to the challenges. Now that there is a legal compliance related issue, I'm sure they're going to pull up their socks and act on it faster. If I were to say probably a year before, it takes a lot of effort for them to recognize that something as small and as menial as a preferred pronoun or a preferred name, misgendering, dead naming a person, talking about your genitals, talking about what you do with your genitals, has been seen as very normative and inquiry-based questions, because the people were curious to know about what's there. But the curiousness never translated into proactive or affirmative action when it comes to preferred name or pronoun. I was fortunate that I have transitioned, my documents are in my preferred gender marker as a female. I would pass very well as a woman. But then, as I said, not all women or not all men or not all trans persons look the same. And perhaps if I were not in that evolved state of transition that I am in, I would perhaps be grappling with a background verification check saying that who is Ernest Narona and who is Zainab Patel. Like the police once asked me, is this a case of love jihad? And I said, yes. So I guess all of those questions together are something that the corporate do not seem to either understand or wake up to the reality. Why the stress on preferred name? And even if an 8-hour window in a physical workspace gives you the opportunity to be the person who you wish to be, that is a very, very, very big enabler for trans person. I think now most of us are okay to talk about trans insurance, about gender neutrality, if I may say so, in most of the stuff. But most of it will also kind of act as a very big catalyst because you have a transgender protection law. And I, for one, have also today, Subhadip, been nominated to join the National Council for Trans Persons. It is a statutory body set up under law by the government of India. So I'm one of the members, and definitely something on private sector inclusion and mainstreaming is definitely an area which I want to push, not just from a diversity number perspective, but real mainstreaming of trans persons. Like one person had called me a year ago before I joined KPMG and said that, there's a company in Mumbai that's looking for an HR professional with 10 years of experience, and they don't mind a transgender person. And I turned back to the person and I said, that was with the emphasis on don't mind. And I said, what's there to mind? If a trans person had 10 years of experience, you would be losing your mind over getting that person rather than a person wanting to mind to have a trans. So I think this one phase of conflict where you're talking about forced integration and inclusion versus meaningful equity and equity for trans persons is more than 74 years pending behind India's independence. So look at the kind of measures that will be need to put in place to get them to the mainstream.
Right. No, absolutely. And I mean, we are in 2020. Now, what I wanted to ask is, do you think India has accepted the transgender community? Now, my question is not about acknowledgement, but acceptance. And there is a difference. What I mean by acceptance is like when you go overseas, you see there is no differentiation. It's a differentiation. It's a choice. And you would see in mainstream, people are involved. People are there are equal opportunities. So I wanted to understand your views. Because you've been one of the early flag bearers of this movement. What's your view on this?
Acceptance is a long, lonely road for trans people, starting from themselves and then radiating outside. So to answer the questions in no uncertain terms, it is a definitely big no. I think there is very high level of tolerance for trans people, much higher than that of other lesbian, gay, bisexual persons, because there is a certain cultural tinge to it. There is now a legislative framework. There was a judicial statement several years, 5-6 years ago. So I think a slow pressure of moving from tolerance to acceptance has begun. But we are far away from understanding even the contours of what this, like for example, Zainab Patel as a trans director in an organization is well accepted. That is because one passes as a woman, may meet your understanding of dignity, of self-worth, of what a trans person should look like, what a trans person's body should be like, and what a trans person language should be like, and how much would a trans person earn to consider themselves as people who contribute to India's economy and growth. Right. But for the others, okay, your body type doesn't match my idea of a trans person's body type. Are you sure this is you, or is it a phase that you're going through? Your love partner. I mean, a lot of people think that trans people, is only about gender, not about sexual lives. They think that either you don't have a sexual life or you have organs that are disabled and hence you're not able to have any sex. So it's like people with disability. People think that people with disabilities should not have sexual lives, cannot have a sexual life, and we should not even think of them as sexual beings because they are such divya beings. They are called divyang. So divyang people cannot have sexual life, cannot have lives with karma in them. The same thing is with trans people. Understanding the fact that we are sexual like everyone else is, would have a choice in partners. So as a trans woman, say for example, if I were to date a man, perhaps that would be more acceptable for people than say as a trans woman if I wanted to date another woman. So I guess there are different degrees of acceptance, also depending on the social strata that you are and what you bring to the table. Right. But I think one thing is for sure, Subhadip, that we as a community survive the Mughals, survive the British, and we stood steadfast in what we believed in. So acceptance has come because we are the drivers of that acceptance. Look at the court cases that people have filed. Right to have a live-in relationship, right to get legal gender recognition done, etc. So these are all kind of basic civil rights which are available to people of heterosexual, at least people who are heteronormative in that sense. So this has been something that we've been grappling with on our own levels, and sooner or later we are going to make the dent. And now that we have some kind of a legal backing, which will take very long for any government or any judicial body to overthrow, I think acceptance will be a normal, maybe the next 40 years or so, when people start seeing more people around us and see that they are not necessarily people who will clap and beg or dance on the streets. And that's not the idea of a stereotypical case, someone whom you see in movies or someone you will hear in a radio talk show. We are much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I wanted to finish off as my last question is, how do you propose the stereotypical image of transgender community in India be changed or can be changed?
There is this Urdu, so I love Shairi, so I often quote from fairs, and there's this typical two-liner Shairi from fairs which says that दिल ना उम्मीद तो नहीं नामुमकिन ही तो है लंबी है गम की शाम पर शामी तो है. And the idea about struggling to gain in the true sense, because for trans person like me, it was breaking the educational barrier, breaking the professional barrier, breaking the social barrier, breaking the economic barrier to come where I am today. I think there are many things that need to be done. The first thing is trying to have rational attitudes towards sexuality and gender identity. People need to be taught, because the fact is that they actually need to be taught that gender is fluid, gender is not constant between male and female, and in nature everything is diverse.
Right.
We become bigots by becoming disinclusive, but the fact is that nature is diverse by its property. You'll not find two mangoes, two apples, two bananas of the same type. How do you expect people to be of a similar type? So when there is diversity in nature, which is considered natural, so anything divergent of that is unnatural. And this inclusiveness is actually unnatural rather than being inclusive. So you can choose to be a bigot and say, this is not what I believe, this is not what my religious texts tell me, this is not what the society I live in. Then at some point of time the jungle rule will prevail, just like what had happened with COVID. The moment you let nature take its course, it will overrun its boundaries and seep into and make things and reclaim. So I think for a person like me, it is about reclaiming my spaces, and unfortunately reclaiming has to come at a personal cost to me, rather than to be open as something that we can both collaborate and work on. So I think a lot of transgender persons across India are working on that. The government has a role to play in educating people about gender identity and not making it troublesome, so that people like me at the age of 9 and 10 and 12 do not have to undergo depression or self-harm, and rather lead a life and get proper education, so that today there can be many more Zainab as directors in this country rather than one trans director in this country.